reckon we should get started? Do I need a microphone?
Not in your way.
People at the back can't hear me, so I didn't answer. So then we'll go. Thanks for coming. There's an awful lot on. So thanks for coming. I hope this is fun. It's certainly going to be fast. It's only a 40-minute session. And yeah, got a lot to get through. That's me, that's my avatar, that's my Twitter. And in this talk, I'm accusing Agile of the attempted murder of business analysis. So who's old like me? Shane's old like me. Okay, so the older people will understand, the younger people bear with us for a moment while we reminisce. When you're old like me and Shane, you see things that happen on much slower cycles, pendulums. Some pendulums swing very slowly. And, you know, who remembers mainframes? Shane will. There you go. And then mainframes were the best thing ever. And then we had PCs, and they were the best thing ever. And all the computing power moved to the desktop because there was so much power and you had so much grunt per user. It was fantastic. And then, oh my God, if everyone's got a PC, managing them sucks. Let's put it all back on the server. Let's make everything web apps because then it's so much easier to manage. But then web apps, God, they suck. They can't do anything. So now let's try and write spreadsheets in browsers. So now we have to have all the power on the desktop without any of the pain. You see where I'm going? We are, if we think we're a rational industry, we are completely full of it. We are a fashion industry. So anyone who's been to one of my talks will know they're opinionated, so they're at least fun. I always disagree. If you haven't been to one of my talks, you need to understand that I'm legally blind. I have central vision loss. So if you want to ask a question and you do it in a feeble manner, I won't notice. You need to do it in a vigorous manner. And you also have the advantage over me that you can read my slides and I can't. So I'm guessing what's on the screen. So picture me. I'm the engineering director at Envano. I need you all to take your seats because my next statement is going to be shocking. There's someone standing who might not withstand the shock. I'll risk it. I'll risk death. Are you ready? I am not an Agile coach. Thank God. So the good news is you can trust me because I have nothing to tell you. And that's all I'll say on the matter. So, like every good talk about Agile, first joke went well? As you'll all understand, business analysis starts with my mother-in-law and Isis. I'm going to talk, then we're going to get actually serious, then we'll talk about what business analysis should mean in an Agile world, and then whirlwind tour of some tools somehow, like 12 tools in 40 minutes. I don't know how this is going to happen. But the pendulum I'm talking about, the context for this is when I was young and Shane was young and dinosaurs roamed the earth, we were programmers and we aspired to be the job description we wanted to be. I'm speaking from myself, I don't know anyone else. We wanted to be an analyst programmer. You started out being a programmer, which meant you were too dumb to understand what you were doing. So you just did it. And you aspired to be an analyst programmer, right? So the first 15 years of my career was wanting to be allowed to spend time with customers and understand a problem, okay? And then the web came along. I built my first web app in 1996. And all that mattered, if anyone's read their Mythical Man Month, The Dancing Bear, all that mattered was that it worked. That's all that mattered. Solving problems mattered. The window was just, the technology wave was so big and so new, you just had to get it to work. And I think that's what's wrecked business analysis as a discipline. And Agile hasn't helped by, I'm all about delivery, right? Delivery working software. Don't get me wrong. And Envano, we're deploying 20 times a day. We've got our deployment stuff in order. But the pendulum of, waterfall does all this analysis, so we shouldn't do any of it. We'll go all the way over the Agile and just type. Just die. Right? So that's kind of the pendulum I'm talking about. Maybe we've gone a bit too far. So, my mother-in-law, the reality, most members of ISIS are Arabs. That's not a racist statement, that's a fact. Okay? However, my mother-in-law, my 3AW listening mother-in-law, right? She's like, that's her behaviour. Like, she cannot see the difference, you know, set theory, not so much, Venn diagrams, not so much. And I want you all to laugh heartily at my mother-in-law, because then I'm going to get my big mirror out from behind the thing and pointing at you. You ready? The reality. What does it say? Most waterfall projects include rigorous business analysis. That's the reality. Our behaviour is that. Try saying to someone, try going to an agile environment and talking about rigorous business analysis and send me the video. Because, yeah, good luck, right? The fashion industry's over here because rigorous business analysis is like my mother-in-law at ISIS. That's just guilty by association with waterfall. Not that anyone born in the last 20 years has ever been on a waterfall project. I don't know why all these people know so much about waterfall. Anyway, so the reality, I think that says, Shane?
Some significant things will change and you're better off adapting when they do.
That's true. That's true on every project I've ever been on. However, our behaviour, it's more like this. That one little word, right? We behave like don't bother thinking about anything because everything will change, right? And I'm here to tell you that is a bunch of crazy baloney. I love Google Images. You can just search for anything and you go, wow, I got a hit. Somebody made a crazy baloney image. So, this is the myth of Agile. You got some work. You work out, you just have you do your story breakdown, you get an amount of work, you start doing the work, you have some range. I hope all your estimates are ranges, people. You have a range, best case we get done here, worst case we get done there, and we start doing the work. And the rate at which we do the work flaps, and some people obsess about that. That's not the problem, in my humble opinion. This is the problem. This is what actually more often happens. Is you do a bit of work and you find there's more work. You do a bit more work and you find there's more work. You do a bit more work and you find there's more work. Until an executive sponsor like me comes along when you pass your worst case and says, "Shit it!" And the scope suddenly drops to the work done and we call it done. Anyone? Is this resonating for anyone? Yeah! So, there has been far more obsession in the Agile community about velocity and it's not the main issue. I don't think. In a lot of cases. Not all cases. A lot of cases, we don't even know what we're doing. So, all I mean by business analysis is knowing a bit more about what you're doing. Maybe that's what I should call it. So, and culturally, we have attempted the murder of business analysis by pretending it doesn't matter. And it does. So, if you're going to do lightweight business analysis, which I highly recommend, so I would like to separate rigorous from heavy. People think rigorous means heavy, and it doesn't. So I want business analysis that's rigorous, but I want it to be lightweight. So, some ideas for how you know if you're doing it, and I'll be able to read my own slides if I put them here. So you focus on things that don't change. So, I work for Envato. We are a hipster, 21st century electronic. We are what Malcolm Turnbull wants Australia to be, right? we are a global innovator. Seriously, Envato, you don't know Envato, you don't care about Envato, but Envato has one of the biggest websites in Australia called teamforex.net. Startup, about 9 years old. We've paid out. We're a marketplace, we're like iTunes, we're like the iTunes store of the digital ecosystem. Anyway, so we are all the hip and all the change and all the dynamic and all the blah blah, but the fundamental concepts in our business, I promise you, will not change in 10 years. There are people who make things, they're called authors. There are people who buy things, they're called buyers. And there are e-commerce transactions under the hood, right? Like eBay. The fundamental concepts of eBay haven't changed. Fundamental concepts of Amazon haven't changed. Like the fact that you want a mobile app to interact with the things in your business is new, but the fundamental concepts. So focus on the things that don't change and stop pretending that they don't exist. It's got to be easy to create, it's got to be easy to update. I like to fit on a single A3 sheet of paper. It can't always be done, but try. And chuck it if you don't use it. As soon as you realise you're not using it, chuck it. So, a whirlwind tour of some tools you can use. I want it to be practical. I don't claim to be able to train you on any of this stuff in this session. Just a whirlwind tour of some stuff I've used. There's heaps of other good stuff. But I've got half an hour to do like 10 or 11 tools, so I want occasional reminders of how badly I'm doing.
Oh, okay, I can do that.
Concept maps. Every team has jargon. Every team. So you join a new team and there's jargon. And when they say the words, as a new person in the team, the words are not assembling the neural networks in your brain that they are in everyone else's, right? So everyone likes the team to have a ubiquitous language. However, and concept maps are a way of taking your ubiquitous language and writing it down, but in a very cool interactive way. I came to be deeply in respect of this approach from this guy. I don't recommend the book, it's a really turgid read, but Joseph D. Novak has been pushing the barrow of things like this in the education field for 30 or 40 years. So concept maps have nothing to do with software, nothing to do with business, nothing to do with Agile. They are to do with learning. And the TLDR of this book is if you want to teach someone something, you have to start by figuring out what they already know and build conceptual bridges to what they don't know. So if I'm trying to explain Ruby on Rails to my dad, I don't know why I would want to do that, but my 83-year-old dad may be curious about what I do. So I have to start by what he knows. And he's got a computer, like he's got a Mac, he's got a laptop, and he knows how to use a browser, and he knows how to use Word and all that stuff. So you've got to start with concepts he knows, like computer and Word and browser, and then extend to web page and hyperlink and HTTP requests and web server. And you build a conceptual bridge and only move when you feel safe. So that's learning how to learn. So here's an example of a concept map of something I'm assuming you don't know much about. That's deliberate. It's an architectural pattern called command and query responsibility separation. And when reading a concept map, it's pretty complex. It's words in boxes and words on arrows. And you read sentences following the arrows. That's it. That's a concept map. And you can assemble your jargon into a concept map. Now the problem is they get really gnarly, they get really big, really fast. So the problem is keeping into an A3 sheet of paper in their entirety, which you can't do, but you can do it on subsets like this. Here's another example, talking about a client application that issues a command, and the command handler receives the command, blah, 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 blah. So what I want, if you join my team, and we're using this kind of architecture, and you're unfamiliar with it, I want you to be able to self-serve what the words mean, because you're going to hear them every day for the next 6 months. So I'm going to print that out for you, we're going to have a coffee, we're going to talk it through, and I'm going to stick it on your wall. So I want the words to mean the same thing. And some friends and I built an app which you can go and use for free, conceptmaps.io, sign in with Twitter, make these things for free, share them with your team, because every time I've tested it, and I've done many workshops on this in different organisations, including Envato, you take a team who's been working together for a long time and build a concept map for their domain, get them to do it individually, they don't match. And you can measure how alike they are, and then the TLDR is they're very unlike. I did a talk just on this at Agile Australia that might be on the YouTube somewhere. So that's concept maps, which amounts to words in boxes connected by arrows that describe your ubiquitous language. That's what I've got. Business rules. Business analysts talk about business rules a lot. Developers talk a lot about business rules, but I don't observe a lot of rigor, and it makes me sad. So I don't know, who knows Ron Ross, business rules approach? God. Okay, this is why I'm still talking about it 15 years later, because this guy should be, like, just known by everyone. He's awesome. This book I recommend. Very small, very simple, very terse, very dense with awesome. So a business rule, once you've got your ubiquitous language, so you start with consummate, you get what your terms actually mean in your world. Then a business rule is just an atomic statement in that language that should always be true. That's it. That's the business rule. A statement that should always be true. It's not an if in your code. The developers think a business rule is just an if in their code. And then they mess it with another if, and then another if, and then another one. But not on Wednesdays, it'll be something else. The point with business rules is they're atomic. Right? They're atomic. Every business rule statement should stand alone. It should be an independent statement that should always be true. And, so what's an example? Ron Ross uses an example like, actually, I'll get to the language structures. So Ron Ross defines structures for the sentences in which you describe the business rules. That's where the rigor comes from. Let me whip my head to this so I know what I'm talking about. An exception to a business rule is another business rule. The analogy for developers I use is CSS. So any developers here, who knows what CSS even is? Cascading style sheets, right? So CSS is, if you haven't actually used the business rule engine or an inference engine or something like that, then CSS is your best analogy. You make statements that are independent of all the other statements you make. So you can say, well, if there's a paragraph with this class, and inside that there's a hyperlink with blah, 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 then colour it purple. Now, the fact that you have that rule doesn't mean it'll ever be applied. Those conditions might not appear on your website, right? The rule stands apart from what actually happens. Right? So that's the CSS analogy. 20 past. Woo-hoo. Rules are not stories. The reason rules are not stories, Ron Ross says that every rule, he says it up here, there are always multiple places where rules can be violated. So a rule, an example of a rule might be a customer may place an order on credit only if the customer is in good standing. Okay? Where it means they don't owe you money or whatever that means. So you have the concept of, and the concepts you'd have to get in your ubiquitous language are like good standing. What does that mean? You have to have a definition of that. And then you'd have to have an order on credit. What does that mean? But the reason rules are not stories is because that rule stands alone. It might never be violated. And you might implement it in software, you might not. But there are always multiple places where it can be violated. So it can obviously, and most typically, software people would go, oh, well, when the customer places an order, I'll stop them if they owe us any money. Yeah, right, fine. But what happens if overnight, the money they owe us ticks over 90 days, and they're now not in good standing, and today you let them place an order, right? There's always multiple places where rules can be violated. So the rules have to stand alone. And it's not something I see practice. People write tests, so they'll write a test that when you place an order, you can't place one if you owe money. They'll have a scenario and a cucumber and a blah blah, but they won't have a statement in an authoritative place. This is the rule. So there could be a system in other places. So there are rants galore on this. And Ron Ross defines sentence structures. That's called rule speak in his world. So you typically have things like must. I use the may only. So a customer may place an order on credit only if they're in good standing. Something like that. Always and never. There are also what have I got here? Definitional rules. So you often have terms in business which are special cases, like a gold customer or a VIP customer or a customer in good standing. So what's the definition of those things? Also used in rules. We use rules to describe them. And there's also guidance statements as well, which are not rules but help to not confuse people. So if you don't have a rule about whether a 17-year-old can buy car insurance, you know what I mean? Because there isn't one. But the absence of a rule can confuse people. So you can have a guidance statement. So you might say, a person under the age of 18 may be declared the owner of a vehicle or something, right? So it's a guidance statement, not a rule. So that's it. Now, you've got your concepts clear, you've got business rules that stand apart from your software, but then you realise, oh my God, I've got a shit ton of business rules, more than I can deal with. What am I going to do? So, decision tables is an awesome tool for not even highly complex. Most decisions that software make are pretty complex, and most developers don't realise how complex. So, here's an example. This is an example from Aconex. So we'll go through this one cell that you know, right? So Aconex, into a quick, I used to work at Aconex, so this might be, hello Aconex people. This one, awesome. So Aconex has got this cool model of, you know, we're all used to sending mail, email. We all know what email is, right? But Aconex is different. In Aconex, your organisation sends email to this other organisation, right? And it's not just between the individuals, it's between the companies, right? So the question is, this decision table, the last column says, can I view this mail? So all the factors, whether, because it's not just the sender and the receiver who can see a mail in this system. You might be part of the sending organisation and you can also see the mail. So the decision is, can I see the mail? Yes, no. And when you see the decision table about, so each of those represents a rule. Each row represents a rule, right? But expressed in a table. And people freak out. That's a closer look. That doesn't help. So don't freak out. There's a super secret, simple way, magic way to make them easy. Did I say magic?
Magic key.
I didn't. It's not magic. I lied.
You say magic key? Come on.
Yeah, I know, but I lied. I'll let you down. So you start with the last column being the. So here's the trick. You start with the last column, which is, can I see the mail? Or, you know, can I buy this insurance? Or whatever it is. And it's yes or no. What's the first input that determines that? Now, you might start with an example in this email scenario where, am I the sender? So if I'm the sender, so you start your decision table nice and simple. You say, am I the sender? Yes. Decision, can I see the mail? Yes. Am I the sender? No. Can I view the mail? No. So you start out nice and simple that everyone can understand, right? And then you grow them one input at a time. So let's now say that the next consideration about whether you can see the mail is whether you were a recipient. Yes, no. So the way you grow your decision table, so your decision table has 2 rows. I think I've got this example. This is where I've expanded it to 4. So you start out with one input column with 2 states, yes, no, decision, yes, no. You then want to introduce a new input, as to the example being, am I the recipient? So you've got to double the number of rows and do the Cartesian product of the states. Developers will get that. But you have to duplicate the number of rows for however many states there are in the new input. So I've only got yes, no, so I get 2 by 2, which is 4, and you redefine the decisions. Now, there's a whole talk on this. The point is, and the thing that makes me frustrated with developers, is you'll see developers, and they'll be writing some code in this kind of area, right? And developers in the room? Who are the developers in the room? Please forgive me for what I'm about to say. Okay. But they'll be pairing, you say, yeah, pairing's great, and they'll be using T to D, and we love T. And they'll be writing code in this area, and they'll be like, you'll see them, they'll sit there and go, what test should we write? Well, why don't we test that if you got one leg, and you're this, and this thing, and then that shouldn't let you see the mail. Yeah, that's a good one, yeah. Bang, 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 read, green, refactor, we're so agile. What test do you reckon we should write? What about, your Liberal voter and you this and whatever, and you live in Victoria and but you weren't born here, and then you shouldn't be able to see the mail. Yeah, great, let's do some agiles. Right? It's a completely random, crap, non-rigorous subset of something that isn't good. Right? There is no rigor. Like, what are the inputs? How many states do they have? Multiply it, it's not hard. Make a table. bang, like the denial about the complexity. That's my king, as you can tell. So use decision tables. They're not that hard. Developers, I love you. I'm one. Used to be. I'm no good anymore. This one will be quick. Business model canvas. This is one A3 sheet in which you can understand my wife's eBay business. What can we learn, Shane? What type of relationships does she want with her customers?
She's got key partnerships.
No, relationships with her customers.
Up there. Okay. We've got personal assistance.
Yep.
Transactional. I need my glasses too. And
Transactional.
And long-term.
There you go. So she wants long-term relationships with people, but they're transactional relationships, buying, selling, and personal service. Now, what are her key, is it offerings? Value proposition.
Oh, I could do rare and beautiful objects and personal service.
Excellent.
Sorry.
So you come to her business is based on the rarity mainly. Like you can't get, if you see it on her site, the price is high because you're not getting it anywhere else. Right? This is like one of these, right? What about the partnerships, key relationships?
Couriers, auction houses, and repairers and restorers.
Yeah, right. So these are the things people she needs to work with. Auction houses to find the stuff. Repairers and restorers, then you get an old clock and you have to get it working again, and then you've got to ship it safely. There's a lot of this stuff that's damage. So a business model canvas, if you haven't seen it before, in certain contexts they're really, really useful. This one was drawn with an app. There's an iPad app. I can't remember what it's called, but it's good for it. And it's cool. This is a picture from that app. It's really good. So business model canvas, highly recommended, just to get an overview, particularly if you're coming into a new place and you don't know what they do. I should have done one for Envato, and I could explain it to you. Swim lane diagrams. I reckon most BAs know about this. Hey? Half past? Okay. Not doing very well. A swim lane diagram is a thing you can stick on a wall, definitely fits on an A3 sheet of paper, which is basically, unlike a concept map where you have the nouns in the boxes and they're connected by the verbs, a swim lane diagram has the verbs in the boxes, so you just describe the activities that people are doing, and it's a role. I'm sure all the BAs in the room have seen these at different times, but developers aren't that good or that frequent users of it, and they're really effective. Like, one of the other things we did was, in the 90s as developers, we got into OO sort of beat OO1 in the 90s, and out of that came how the hell you actually do OO software at scale, and out of that came UML, and out of that came pain. So we just go, well, anything that looks like thinking, and I can't do it. But not all of UML is terrible. So there's some really good things. This is one of my favourites. Yes. I got a fan. I love old guys. They know stuff. IDEF 0 is a FIP standard that out of the Navy, which would have beaten UML if functional was hip in 1994. So I think it's going to come back, right? Because functional's coming back. And you wouldn't have heard of it probably, but who's ever seen an ER diagram? The clawfoot one? Yeah, you draw database tables with claw feet for the many and all that stuff, right? That's actually IDEF 1X. The way of drawing those pictures is a standard called IDEF 1X. You don't know that, right? But I'm trying to make this seem less alien. So IDEF 0 is a formal way of drawing diagrams, and this is it. This is it. You have an activity, so it's a verb in the box, like the swim lane diagram. It's a function, it's a process, and it has inputs, and it produces outputs. But it's more the nuance for it. It's beautiful. Lucky they only thought of 4 things they needed because the box had 4 sides. To do the process, it needs stuff, mechanisms or enablers, and the process is controlled or guided by other things. Okay, so that is the sum total of IDEF 0, except there's nesting, and there's the way they connect. But that's okay. Yeah. So here's an example. You want to cook a pizza. you're transforming your ingredients. Notice I'm asserting that you are transforming the customer. I don't know if they'll survive our conversation over coffee after you laugh, but this is saying you're transforming the ingredients into pizza and you're transforming a hungry customer into a satisfied customer. That's the change that you've brought about. Maybe they haven't eaten it yet. Don't give me a hard time. The mechanisms or the enablers for that process are the chef and the kitchen. There would be others. And the things that are controlling that process are the recipes for the stuff and the order for the stuff. Okay? And the reason these things are awesome is that they connect. They go, well, where do the recipes come from? There must be a process somewhere whose output is recipes. Okay? And what does that process need? Okay? And you can only go, but you only go as far as you need to go. But like, where did the chef come from? You know what I mean? There must be some output that produces a chef. Right? Because everything you need, everything that you're transforming things with, it makes you think about all the things your business needs or your system needs to do its work. So the way these, you might, if you're Googling for this stuff, if you notice, there's two words for the things at the top and two at the bottom, because some people call them ICOM diagrams, input, control, output, mechanism, and some call them IGOE, input, guidance, output, enabler. I come, I go, ha ha ha. So you might find it on IGOE. So that's those. They're really cool, and I've got a half-baked tool for drawing them. State transition diagrams are really cool. Like, more geeks should do this. My experience is more often than when developers say, oh yeah, this thing over here is a state machine, and you go and look at it, it's not a state machine. So, state machines have no memory. So, but there are lots of things that can be modelled with state machines. This isn't actually typical because it hasn't got does not exist state at the start or a terminal state. But the basic idea is that when I'm coaching people on how to think in state transition diagrams, I say the bubbles are your answer when the boss calls and says, "Where's that thing up to?" And you say, "It's running, or it's pending approval, or it's it's in review." Right? That's the answer to that question. And then the arcs, they're usually called arcs, are the stimulus that takes you from one state to another. And they're really easy. And if you have core things in your system or your business or your world that this kind of thing suits, I don't know what they would be, then sticking it up on the wall and making sure everyone's on the same page is a really good idea. I've done talks on theory of constraints before. We might just make this. Maybe not. They're definitely on the intertubes. One's called So You Think You Know How to Think, and the one I did in this room a couple of years ago was called Why Nothing You Ever Do Might Make the Slightest Difference. Sorry for the depressing title. But basically, these are pictures you can draw that are about logic. So there's a couple of types I'm going to talk about: current reality tree, future reality tree, goal map, and conflict resolution. So basically, the arrows in these diagrams represent if-then. So if we take action A, then this desirable effect B will happen. So can't really go into it, but the guy who invented this, like Goldberg, the guy who wrote the goal, would say there's an assumption under every arrow. So when someone comes to you and says, we should use Agile, because then the world would just be fabulous. They're saying something like this, and there's a whole bunch of assumptions. But be that as it may, 3 minutes to go. So here's an example of an assertion. If it's raining, I get wet. But it's more complex than that. And the reason these kind of tools are good is that when you look at the root cause of a problem, the more, like in my talk I talk about 5 whys, and why I don't like 5 whys is because it gives you one cause for each thing, and it makes you think too simplistically. Most problems in the world have combinatorial causes. And the more causes you have for something you don't want to have happen, every single one of these gives you a way to address it. So you can wait for it to stop raining, you can go borrow an umbrella, or you can come inside. You know what I mean? Like everything you've identified as necessary can be addressed. So it's a good way to solve problems. They also let you find vicious cycles. So the guy who created these tools said, if you're analysing a problem that has been persistent and you haven't found a cycle of causality, keep going, because you won't solve it. Problems will, and then you'll go, but we got all the Agile coaches in and we still suck. Well, you know, what was your vicious cycle that you're in? Goal maps are the opposite. In a goal map, the arrow doesn't mean if then, it means if not, then not. Sorry for the non-geeks, but it basically is prerequisites. So if your goal is to hold a great conference, you might say, well, I've got some prerequisites. I need a great program and I need to provide a great experience. I don't know how I'm going to do that. They're outcomes, so it's outcome thinking rather than a work breakdown, it's an outcome breakdown. So you might break down your conference planning into things like this. So you have a goal, you have critical success factors, and you have necessary conditions. So what has to be true? We fail the mixed, local, and international speakers. I think I did this for Agile Australia. So you get to decide what are the components, what's going to make up a great experience, and define all the prerequisites, and you plan it top down, and you execute it bottom up. And people say, well, when do you stop? And my answer is when I can delegate on the boxes.
60 seconds.
60 seconds. Conflict resolution diagram is a way of getting people to understand the thinking behind a conflict. Now, conflict in theory of constraints is not like I like St Kilda, you like Richmond. It's two states of being that cannot both happen. So you can't both buy a company and not buy a company. That's a conflict in this world. So basically it comes down to the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want. People want to do something to satisfy some need, but you can't always get what you want. But if you try something, you get what you need. So you basically, the other thing that this thinking tool makes people consider, in fact, it's stronger than that. Goldrat said, if you have a conflict, you can't have a conflict without a shared purpose, which is hard to grok. That's what he said. These people wouldn't have this conflict if they were actually different companies. One of them could buy, one of them could not buy. So the shared purpose of running the company is why there's a conflict. So you basically take one of the wants. You got to find the need, and then ditch the original want, come up with another one, and get everyone what they need. And that's how you get about the conflict, and you can stick that on the thing. And we are out of time. That's the whirlwind tour of tools you might use. Hit me up if you want more detail. No time for questions. Have fun. I will hang around if anyone's got any questions. Developers want to punch me in the hand.
Are you going to put your slides up, James?
Yes, of course. The slides will go up. I couldn't put them up before I finished them. Hello, Katrina.
I learned stats.
Hey? Oh, really?
I don't know whether I need to do something.